Say that again.
I said, we live like 3 miles from Legoland. So tell your dad to bring you. We live really close to Legoland and really close to the Wild Animal Park.
Should we go to San Diego and visit Jolie and Piper?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you guys come out anytime. We'd love to have you. And isn't it true, teachers, that in October, kids get to go to the Wild Animal Park for free? Do you guys know that?
No.
They do.
I think so. I think the zoos too, yeah.
Yeah, a month of October.
Really, I just started the recording button, so whenever you or Bill are ready, you guys can kick it off when you're ready.
Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to American Indian Education for All, our Call to Action webinar. This is our second part in the series of our last webinar that we held last June at the Paula Indian Reservation, or August at the Paula Indian Reservation. We're excited today to be focusing our attention on actual curriculum that has been developed by my good friend Bill Carbone and his team at the Rock and Roll Foundation and TeachRock, and I'll let Bill introduce himself.
Hello, this is Bill, and I'm so pleased and honored to be here. And yeah, the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation worked with Rumble, the film Rumble, the Indians Who Rock the World, to create this curriculum that we're going to discuss today. And it fits into the broader vision of what we do, but I think it's unique and certainly to me, one of the more meaningful things we've ever gotten to take part in. So I'm so happy to share it with you. I'm so happy about this event that we're working together on.
Next slide. Yeah, so I hope everyone has seen the documentary Rumble, American Indians Who Rock the World. If you haven't, please check it out. It's on Amazon Prime, I believe, available through PBS. There are a number of avenues in which to watch it and also purchase it. It's something that you should have as a part of your collection, but it's a very inspirational film that really gives a nice overview of the contributions that American Indians, Indigenous people have had to rock and roll. And I think people walk away from the screening shocked, surprised. And, you know, I've seen I think at every screening I've ever participated in or been a part of, people cry just at tears out of joy to see themselves through a lens in which they can see Indigenous people making a contribution. And so we wanted to showcase this particular curriculum in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day. Indigenous Peoples Day has been picking up momentum for the last 20 years around the country, with more and more cities, towns, and states moving away from Columbus Day and focusing on Indigenous Peoples Day. And we thought, what better way than to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, but to take a breath and talk about, share, participate in the contributions and celebrations of Indigenous people through music. Who doesn't like music? So we want to showcase this curriculum that can be used really K through 16. You can really tailor it to fit your own community. We always want you to focus on place-based learning, so focus with the tribal nations, tribal communities in your area, but it's nicely done and packaged for you, and we're just going to go through it. We ask that you hold your questions till the end. My colleague Bill here is on New York Eastern time, and we're hoping to get through this so that I can take part in answering your questions. And we will be at the National Indian Education Association presenting a workshop on Thursday. So if some of you are going to be there, please stop by and say hello. Next slide. So we talked briefly about Indigenous Peoples Day. And again, most people are still transitioning and trying to get used to what to do for Indigenous Peoples Day. Some people take the day off. In the East Coast, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think schools are shut.
It's true. We have a legacy of a different day that happens on the Monday, the 14th, which I know you don't have. So that's why we chose Tuesday the 15th, because we wanted to make sure we picked a day where all schools are open so as many teachers can take part as possible. So it's a holiday here on the 14th, and it's one of those, it's hard to take a holiday away. It's hard to take a day off away. So we have states that are taking the steps to change the name of that day off. Vermont, for instance, now celebrates Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday the 14th. Other states have stuck with the previous name. However, there are a lot of places that are trying to find a way to recognize both and do something with both. And so that's why we thought, what a great opportunity to do something that has really affirmative, restorative, positive history attached to it, to make the case for why there's a good reason to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day.
So we're partnering with the National Education Association, the National Indian Education Association, of course here at the California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center, TeachRock, and the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation. And we welcome any of you to join and partner up. We really want to showcase the work that you all are doing for Indigenous Peoples Day, and again, using this curriculum, we've done all the guesswork for you. We've also provided some sample curriculum, some video clips, as you'll see as we go through. So next slide. A little bit about the California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center. I think everyone knows about us, but our mission basically is to produce collaborative research and community service relationships between our faculty, staff, our students here at our university with tribal communities. And we do this up and down the state of California, but our work knows no borders. So this is why we've entered into this national partnership. And our goal is to really do reciprocal projects with our tribal community that support the maintenance of tribal sovereignty and tribal culture within those communities in true partnership.
All right, so teachrock.org, we have a funny situation where you've heard Jolie and I both say the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation, and you've heard us say TeachRock. The mothership, as I call it, is the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation. The project and all the curriculum you see today, which is all free, is available at teachrock.org. And the concept of teachrock.org, I think I can move these slides on my own, right? Okay, well, let's take the next slide, please. Is that really music is an amazing way to start a conversation about history, to start a conversation about culture, to start a conversation even about science. And the dialogue is amazing. And what we get when we get dialogue is we get bridges between different people and different generations. So empowering teachers, engaging students, and reducing the dropout rate through music. The other reason that we love what we do and feel strongly about it is that research about students who drop out demonstrates that most students, if they have one teacher or one class that they feel connected to, that's enough to keep them coming back to school. Our goal is to give teachers the tools necessary to make that class and to make themselves that teacher that keeps a student interested, keeps a student coming back another day. And so that could be something like looking at music from a historical perspective to think about that moment in history, or it could be something like using a current artist to get at a conversation that is something you're doing in school. And I think it'll make more sense as we dive in here a little. Next slide, please. So, these are, can I do this? Yeah, there we go. You may have heard of our founder, Little Steven. Here he is in 3 of his main roles. Little Steven on the far left there is with Bruce Springsteen in the E Street Band. He's one of the original members of the E Street Band and still plays in it. He leads his own band. In the middle there, you see Silvio Dante from The Sopranos. That's also Little Steven. That's his acting career. He also has a show on Netflix, Lilyhammer. And then on the right, you see him with his own band. And we did a major outreach tour last year that some people might have seen, where Steven went on the road with his band, and we did professional development at every single stop on the tour. Teachers got in free for at every stop. So he's been an activist his whole life, going back to he was a major player, or the starting founder of the Sun City Project. They got the cultural boycott of apartheid South Africa in the mid-'80s. And in the last few years, he's been a teacher advocate. That's my dog. All right, next slide, please. My dog is having a bad day, so I'm apologizing in advance if that continues. Veda, darling, could you try to get the dog in for myself? Okay. So just a little about the foundation. There are 160 plus lessons on the website, all free to any educator, to anyone who wants to use them. And they're really, when we say K to 12, we mean it. There's resources there for every age in almost every classroom. We're a little short on high school math. We're working on it. But if you head to the lesson plan on our page, you're going to see what you see here. Lessons, you'll always see a slider. It's a little like Netflix, new releases. Next slide, please. Featured lessons. So if you were to go now, you would probably see Rumble lessons, or lessons that have to do with something happening currently that ties into a current moment in education. And then the different collections. So if you see the collections down there, you see these different media partners that we work with. So many of our lessons are built in partnership with documentary film series. So we're going to talk about Rumble, but there's also a set of lessons built with the Beatles film 8 Days a Week. And there's a huge set of lessons built around the PBS Soundbreaking series that's about technology and popular culture. Next slide, please. If you head to the lesson plans page, when there's over 160 lesson plans, it's fun to look at them all, but it can be a little daunting to find what you need. You'll see some drop-down bars that help you get right to what you're looking for, and you can use them in concert with each other. So say you pick ELA off that list, then you can pick elementary. You can even go as far as to look under the activities tab. Say you want a gallery walk for your class one day, you could sort by all the lessons that have gallery walks, etc. Next slide, thanks. You can keep going. So that said, we're going to talk today about the lesson plans we've built in collaboration with Rumble, the Indians Who Rock the World, a film that Jolie gave a wonderful introduction to, and a film that really fits the theme of our work in general, in that it uses the music people make as a gateway into their broader lives and connections to the time and place in which they made it. Next slide. So let's start out by watching the introduction to Rumble.
One can't help but notice the rhythms of the pulse that was here, that is here, been here. The feel of Native American is in a lot of rock and roll.
A lot of R&B musicians and blues musicians talked about having native blood.
The one group that hasn't really been investigated in terms of their contribution is the Native Americans.
It's interesting how much of the Native American element just filters through.
The mixture of cultures, you never know what's going to come of it. And from that, sometimes very interesting artistic things happen. Charlie Patton to Link Ray. Robbie Robertson invented the genre. Jimi Hendrix, the best in his field. You know, Jesse Ed Davis, everybody wanted him. Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
Our peoples were part of the origin story of blues and jazz and rock of American music, but we're left out of the story consistently from the beginning.
Figuring out that these people were Indians, and then we started to ask ourselves, why didn't anyone else know that?
It's an American story. It's a human story. Don't break it apart. Pay the respect that is due.
All right. So maybe you saw the lovely flyer that was put together around this event, and it introduces a number of different lesson plans with suggested age groups. And what we'll do as we move forward here is introduce elements of each of these. And my hope is that I will demonstrate, or we'll demonstrate, a little bit of content from each lesson, a little bit of how to find what you need in each lesson plan on the website. But I want to make sure to say that as much as we've noted the age group that these are pointed at, most of them could be scaffolded in any which direction. And I always find that when I talk to teachers, that's always what's happening. As hard as I try to make a lesson that applies directly to the standards of a 9th grade social studies class, it seems to work swimmingly with a little adjustment all over the place. So, but just to go through really quickly, we're going to look a little bit at elementary. A lesson we're saying is pretty good for elementary, as well as social emotional learning for all ages. And I think that I'll stand by that one for sure. I've seen it work really well, is negotiating Native identity through art and music. Then the music behind the Red Power movement, or middle school focus, which I love that lesson because it adds a dimension to the civil rights movement that is often ignored. Then Indigenous music from Wounded Knee to the Billboard charts is written as an AP history aligned lesson, but includes ways to scaffold. And then debating cultural appropriation is another fantastic lesson that uses a form of debate called structured academic controversy, where students are going to have to take both sides of a debate to try to understand a concept. And finally, there's a general music or interest lesson, which I really do think is good for any age group, that focuses on Link Ray, the guitarist. We didn't actually see him, we saw an actor playing Link Ray in that last clip, but it explores his life growing up poor in Shawnee in North Carolina. And finally, although it's not included today, there's a great book added, an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States for young people, which we feel would be fantastic for the youngest audiences involved. Next slide, please. We've all included some ways to feedback. Jolie, can you say a little bit about the pledge?
Yeah, so we're hoping that everyone joins in and takes the pledge to join the Indigenous Peoples Day Teach-In. You can see the link there, and we also sent it out through our networks, and please share it with others. We really are hoping that you can share a photo of you, your classroom, your students, any kind of commentary, video, story, artwork, how you're using this curriculum, what you're doing to showcase that Indigenous people rock. We're actually having a t-shirt made by the artist Stephen Paul Judd, And our goal is to have the artwork that's downloadable, that anyone can download and put on anything, to showcase that Indigenous peoples do rock, and that's our gift to you for participating in this effort. And then we will also have some student surveys and teacher surveys to capture some data for improvement, for engagement, for participation. So again, we want to see this go national, international. We'd love to see that happen. But, you know, rather than just focus on another Hallmark holiday, we really want people to use this opportunity to celebrate and explore the contributions, the many contributions of Native peoples, and in this case, through music and rock and roll.
Yeah. And you'll notice there's also a hashtag Indigenous People Rock. We're on TeachRock is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we really want people to post something about what they do on this day, because we want to demonstrate how important this day is and how many people want to make it an exciting time and something that they do. And one of the good things about school is we go in our classrooms, our groups of people are kind of quiet. We focus in on what we're doing. Only one of the less good things about that is when we have an event like this and we want to show the robust participation, it's harder to do because we're all doing it in our classrooms. So anything you can do to let us know that you took part, so we can say to people next year, you know, we had 1,000, 2,000 educators last year, and this year we're going to get 10,000. That's why we want you to share.
So join the movement.
That's right. So let's dive into some content. So you saw in the last video clip the intro to Rumble, and I want to say that any video clips you see today are from the lesson plan. So when you go to teachrock.org, those video clips are built right into the lesson plans. They're not linked from YouTube. I know a lot of schools block YouTube. They're all right on teachrock.org, so you can play them right from there without any advertising or anything like that. So this lesson, Link Ray, Rumble, and Growing Up Shawnee Poor asks the question, what does Link Ray's biography say about how Native Americans lived in the first half of the 20th century? And what role did Ray's upbringing have on his music? So let's move forward a clip. Every lesson on our site has an overview. I like to think of the overview like the back of a novel. When you pick up a novel and you read the back quickly to decide whether or not this story is going to rule your world for the next couple of weeks or not. The overview is to help you see how it gives you context of the lesson plan and a little bit about how it will unfold in your classroom. It'll also give you a rundown of the types of activities and the material that's in the lesson plans. Some teachers I know like to assign these to their students to read. Others just like to read them themselves to get going. But every lesson has an overview to give you a chance to see what it's about before you dive in too deeply. Right, we can keep going. In this case, the overview is telling you that Link Ray is a major influence on, we like to think that the earliest rock and roll guitar players are, you know, the early 60s, Keith Richards. They were influenced by Link Ray. So that's one of the things that students will find out in this lesson. Every lesson we build has objectives in both the know form. So here you'll see students will come out of this knowing how racism affected Native Americans in the mid-20th century, a basic history of the Shawnee tribe, about Shawnee U.S. government interactions under President Jefferson and Jackson, so on and so forth, right down to information about Link Ray. And then always a mastery objective too in SWABAT format. By examining videos and autobiographical accounts of Link Ray's early life, students will be able to imagine what life for a Shawnee person might have been like in the first half of the 20th century and how such an experience might have impacted Ray's music. So let's watch one more clip. This one is built right into this lesson and is going to, all the clips that we view and all the clips we use in our lessons are used as a form of almost like a reading. So students are going to respond to the clips. There's going to be follow-up questions. So let it rip.
I was doing this hop at this record hop in Fredericksburg, Virginia, 1957.
the kids were gathered around in this arena and they were yelling for the stroll. Link says, I don't know a stroll.
So I don't know a stroll. Doug said, I know the beat behind one. And you think, you know, I said, okay, that one, like this, and then my God, man, watching me, you know, he said, bam, I went.
It's in the middle of the night and the radio's on, and here comes a sound, you know, that makes you levitate out of bed about 4 feet. What is he doing? There's no sound like that nowhere on the air.
It changed everything. Rumble made an indelible mark on the whole evolution of where rock and roll was going to go. And then I found out that he was an Indian.
That was the rawest form of the kind of guitar that a lot of the guys that I listened to, is where it started, you know, and it even still sounds better when he does it, you know.
All right, so in that clip, we see a little bit of other musicians responding to what Link Wray did. I wonder, I guess it's hard for me to ask a question because I can't hear you guys answer back, but I imagine even if a lot of you didn't know the song Rumble, as if I said, hey, have you heard Rumble? When you heard that song, you went, oh, I know that song. It's been in a lot of things. It's been in Quentin Tarantino loves Link Wray, so he makes a lot of appearances in he makes a lot of appearances in Quentin Tarantino's movies. So one of the things that students are going to do in this lesson is go between stations. There's a few ways it can be done. They can travel between the stations. People can be assigned stations. But in each station, they're going to consider something about what Ray's upbringing would be like. Now, what I love about this is it's all done in handouts, and it's all in the words of Link Wray or somebody from his family. So we didn't write these. They're all quotes that we pulled from interviews with Link and Sherry, his daughter. I believe his sister is in there as well. So the first station is health and poverty, thinking about what it was like to live there in that time in the state of health and poverty. Number 2 here. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the next slide, racism and segregation. So here we have Link contextualizing what life was like for him as a Shawnee. And part of the reason this is called Shawnee Poor in quotes as the title is it's a phrase that Ray himself uses in an interview clip. And he was aware of the Klan. The Klan would ride down his street too. He was aware of the fact that he wasn't white, he puts it that way. And certainly that he was Shawnee too, but he wasn't really just blending in. It was part of his life in this time. Let's keep going. And finally, faith and family. How did Ray and his family go deal with faith, and what was the role of family? So between these 3 handouts, students get a real contextualization of Ray's early life from a number of perspectives, which they can then respond to. So let's keep going. So this lesson, the assessment in this lesson is a persuasive essay. Now, in the interest of time, I didn't show the other clip from this lesson, but the other clip has a relatively modern music pundit suggesting that Link Wray took the song Rumble from his head based on, there's all this talk about it being sort of a heavy and aggressive, and it's actually the only instrumental song ever to be banned on the radio because it was feared that it would incite fighting. But he says, Rumble, Ray took all the oppression in his life and this, that, and the other thing, and all the anger, and created the song Rumble. But then one might get a really different sense when they read the quotes from Ray and his family, and when he talks about where the music comes from. So the final assessment in this lesson is a persuasive essay where the students have to consider what they've seen so far and decide for themselves what do they think inspired the song Rumble, and what about Ray's life created that situation that the song Rumble might have come from. Yeah, great. So one of the questions I get all the time is, hey, wow, that's really cool. It sounds really good. Must be fun. Is it standards aligned? Yes, everything we make is aligned to standards galore. In fact, here you're seeing Common Core standards, which I know are now passé. You'll see up top there's a drop-down bar, select by state. We do have several states. We don't have California up yet, I'm afraid, as everybody moves to ESSA. I know that Common Core is pretty easy to translate for most people now. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that we even have more standards. So our material is very interdisciplinary, so we like to try to include all the standards necessary. Like this lesson concludes with a persuasive essay, which is definitely a classic ELA thing, but also definitely has social studies elements in it, and also has some general music elements and core arts standards applied to it. Great, so moving forward, this is a lesson geared at an older audience, but it could be scaffolded with some help. This lesson tackles a major issue. What is cultural appropriation? How does it affect Native American communities, and should it be regulated by law? And it does so in a way that inspires students to consider the issue by first defining the terms, and then trying to take multiple perspectives into play rather than coming down as a pro or con necessarily. So yeah, let's go forward, please. So if you're going to talk about cultural appropriation, what do you have to do first? You have to know what you're talking about, right? So culture, what is culture? First, students are going to think about what is culture, the ideas, customs, and social behavior of particular people or society. Next. And then they have to think about the second word. What is appropriation? What does it mean to appropriate something? What is the act of appropriation? Take something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. Great. Next. So put them together and we get an official definition of cultural appropriation. Taking intellectual property, traditional knowledge, cultural expressions, or artifacts from someone else's culture without permission, especially when the source community is a minority group that has been oppressed or exploited in other ways. So this is what students are going to consider, and we're going to peel out of our lesson for a second to hand it back to Jolie for a second.
Next slide, Stacy. Next slide. So cultural appropriation is something that Native communities seem to deal with often, especially as we approach the Halloween season. We are, a small representation of the overall American population, but we overrepresent in things like sports, mascots, marketing materials. Just go up and down the grocery store islands and you'll see an overrepresentation of Native Americans on product. Well, a few years ago at Cal State San Marcos, some anthropology graduates thought it would be a great idea to have a Cowboys and Indian themed graduation party. The girls dressed up as Indians and the boys dressed up as cowboys. And they posted these pictures publicly via social media for the world to see. And you could see some of the hashtags. Really focusing around alcohol and celebration using the hashtag Cowboys and Indians. And next slide. the images made their way to the center, and I engaged via a letter, an open letter via the center's Facebook page, next slide, because I started seeing commentary from tribal leaders saying, is this what a degree at Cal State San Marcos gets you? So I thought, how can we make this a teachable moment, and how can we address this without attacking anybody, but really using education to get our point across about cultural appropriation. And so Ohio State University had done these, were a culture, not a costume campaign. And we liked the idea, but we still found that the people being depicted in the campaign looked kind of defeated. So we came up with our own campaign. Next slide. And we worked together with our student groups from across the campus and various faculty from across the campus to come up with the Beyond the Stereotype, there's more to me than what you see. Beyond the stereotype, there is history. And so these were images and a campaign that was made up solely with our students here at the center, where you have students at the time that were current students. And we did all 5 major populations. We did Arab American, American Indian, African American, Asian American, and Latino Americans. And we then overlaid against a historical figure of someone of importance or notoriety with the current student, and then showed them ripping up an image of a cultural appropriation image. And we had the models, in this case, the male and female, who are dressed up inappropriately with Halloween costumes. Those were Halloween costumes that we bought at your local party store that are being sold year-round. And that was a brother and sister team that modeled for us, and we asked them to just dress up like the package. So that's what they dressed up, and then you see these 2 Native students who are ripping up that image, and they're showing you, this is who I am, I'm a real person, a real student, and then behind them are these 2 iconic images. So behind the student Michael Murphy, the male, to the left, we have Sitting Bull. And so you have a little bit about Sitting Bull and a little bit about Michael. And then behind the female student, Maya Goodblanket, we have LaDonna Harris standing behind her. And so we created these images, showcased these images, and you can download these images, next slide, for free. You can print them and use them any way you want off of our website. If you go to the California Culture and Sovereignty Center, we know that these images are being used around the world. And in fact, the young man from the first image, the boy, is the cover of my forthcoming book. You can pre-order on Amazon, called Beyond the American Indian Stereotype. So this was a really teachable moment for our students and our diverse students on how to respond to cultural appropriation, to do it in a way that is creates some change and is uplifting, but was also an opportunity to teach and educate students who sometimes don't know what they're doing when they dress up like some of these characters. So again, you see some of the African American students, and you have Martin Luther King in the background. You see Senator Inouye in the background, and of course the great Maya Angelou. Next slide. You see our Congresswoman Duckworth, who lost several limbs in the Iraq War, and she was the first woman to breastfeed in Congress on the floor last year. You see Zapata. Again, this is an image where people, really don't even know what they're doing and who Zapata was. So this was an opportunity for people to learn, too, about some of these wonderful Americans and contributors and cultural icons. Dolores Huerta in the background. Next slide. So not only do we debate cultural appropriation and study it, but we also talk about appreciation. What is the difference between someone who wants to appreciate and the line of appropriation? And I think in terms of music, this has been an issue that I think lots of our students are interested in learning more about. How does one engage, for example, in rap music without being offensive to African American culture. One doesn't have to offend the other just by appreciating and enjoying one's culture or music or tone or a genre. And so what do we mean by appropriation? And so this lesson plan really is an opportunity for us to look at some of these more controversial issues. And there are some images in Rumble that allow for that discussion. And so we can look at cultural appropriation in terms of music, identity, sports logos, sports mascots, as well as fashion. So there's a little bit of something for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jolie. That's great. And one of the things that I love about the way the quote-unquote debate is set up is that in a structured academic controversy, it's not a debate about winning, it's a debate about perspective. And each one of those stations has 7 or 8 items in it, and things drawn from things like popular culture magazines, both images and writing. Then it also, actually one of the stations has writing about cultural appropriation from a number of different angles. Then there's, of course, sports logos, music. There's everything from really obvious to very gray area to open to interpretation with nobody quite agrees on issues. And students have a chance to try to consider all of it and then have to represent perspectives. This next lesson is geared, this is the one that I said is really can be used as social emotional learning for almost any age group, and as well as a social studies lesson or something for elementary or middle school students. We see Taboo there from the Black Eyed Peas in the picture. He's one of the featured artists in the lesson, which asks how Native American musicians and visual artists negotiated their identity, and what role does physical space play in these negotiations? So next slide, please. So let's start out with the clip. It's better than me talking.
And there was this key expression: be proud you're an Indian, but be careful who you tell. And I used to tell everybody that one of these days, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna play music all over the world. And they'd be like, you know, we don't wanna see you get a broken heart, because that doesn't happen to people like us.
I wanted to be a rock star. I didn't want to be like an Indian rock star. I wanted just to be a rock star. I was homeless, I was broke, but I knew that I was gonna have to come up with some kind of identity if I was gonna make it. In LA, I really didn't fit in because I wasn't black and I wasn't white.
I grew up understanding my Mexican roots more than my native roots. There has to be something that sparks you, and some people will be like, well, it was my dad or my mom, but honestly, for me, it was my grandma. When I went to my grandmother as I got older, she would start breaking out the old photo albums. By bringing me into her culture, which was Shoshone, it set me into understanding where I come from.
Sorry, talking with myself muted. Okay, so one of the activities in this, which is why I think it's good for so many age groups, is this community circle activity. And the concept here is that identity is not just about ethnicity in any way, shape, or form. In fact, everyone has multi-layered identities that they work with in their lifetime. And we don't need to focus on this only as in somebody who is American something / American. This is something that everybody thinks of. So this circle asks students to think of 4 different quadrants in their life. In the inner circle, they put the community that it represents. In the middle circle, the space. And then the outer circle, the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see one that's filled out. And what we're looking at here is something like, okay, the upper left-hand one is the community is their school friends. And where are they with them? They're on the bus, they're in school, and they're at after school. And what is their presentation with them? Well, they're honest, they're joking, right? But right below that is their family and their home. They're there on the home or in the holidays. They are more respectful. They might feel frustrated or like they can't say exactly what they want. And so then, of course, to the right of that, online, whether it's Xbox Live or Reddit, they might be joking, they might be crude. I've talked to people who have used this to help students understand how they behave online versus how they behave in quote unquote real life when they have to be near people. So we see here, one of the goals of work like this is to build compassion and empathy by recognizing that we have similar issues we deal with. And I love this exercise for getting students to see how we all have multi-layered identities, and it's not just something that Taboo has in that video. Next slide, please. But this lesson doesn't stop there, and if you want to go a lot further with it, you can. So in understanding perspectives, we look at it from identity from a number of places. And Jolie, I'm going to let you talk about Native perspectives on land as we might represent it here.
Right, so this is a good opportunity to bring in land acknowledgement for place-based learning, to ask the students whose land are we on, and do some research and discussion about land and about place and about our responsibility to land. You know, we can talk about it from a social, political, religious, spiritual, environmental perspective. A holistic perspective, but that this quote here comes from the book God is Red, who was my professor and he was on my dissertation committee, so I love Vine Deloria Jr. and I love his work, and to focus again looking at our relation to religion or spirituality, whereas most other communities separate the two or the three areas, we don't. It's all embodied in who we are. So looking at land and looking at what we mean by sacred and what we mean by place is critical. But again, for younger populations, a simple land acknowledgement and doing a research, maybe research project, going to a map and finding out whose traditional homeland we reside on and what our responsibility to those people are, and that also very important is recognizing that people still live on that land today, and that land could be shared space, and maybe even researching what are some of the tribal names for place and land that are critical to understanding. And what students most often showcase to me, they're not aware at how much of indigenous words and language are part of the American lexicon without explanation. So that's kind of nice to see them light up and go, wow, I didn't know that was a native word. So there's lots that we can do with this particular lesson plan.
It also uses art. So there's a gallery walk built in. So when I say it's built in, these images are built in and they're printable so that if you want to make a gallery walk in your classroom, you can. So in this lesson, another way to think about perspectives is through art. There's some great pieces in here, this section, this page here, and then if we go to the next slide. And these images aren't just included, there's handouts with them that tell you about the artist and some of the ideas behind it, but are actually trying to get students to interpret the images themselves before reading anything about what the artist necessarily intended, but at the same time introducing these artists. So every lesson has a summary activity as a form of assessment, and this one, after taking all of this work in, students now want to go back and think, imagine you're a public figure or just a person applying for a new job. What about your identity are you presenting, and what are you keeping private? And then what pressures do you feel? And it's a great chance to build empathy around how different people relate to each other, no matter who they are. All right. This is an exciting lesson that I mentioned earlier. I love because I think it's totally fantastic that the whole country celebrates the civil rights movement and that it's such a major part of school curriculum. I do think that one of the shortcomings of how it's been so, I guess, mainstreamed, for lack of a better word, is that there's a story that has crystallized that is very much a binary, and it's just not quite that simple. So this lesson is an exciting way to add a different shade to the civil rights study that is so usually black and white. And it asks, what was the Red Power movement and what role did folk and country music play within it? Next slide, please. Yeah, you're gonna get me. So students are gonna start out by looking at the images one at a time. You know, who's the first image? They're all gonna say Martin Luther King. Who's the second image? Most students are probably gonna say Rosa Parks. Who's the third image? I think a lot of students might get stuck and not know that Dennis Banks is a major player in the civil rights movement at the time. So right away, students are gonna start to realize, oh wow, there was more going on right in that moment than I realized. Next. Let's watch a clip from this lesson plan.
At the essence, folk music is telling the stories of the day. And it's telling stories of the day of the people who are most of the time the most excluded, the most trampled upon.
This is a song about a human being who was also an Indian.
The first folk singer signed to Columbia was not Bob Dylan. It was Peter Lafarge.
For 1,000 years, the sparkling water rushed till the white man stole their water rights.
For natives, for the singer-songwriters, Peter Lafarge was the man. He was addressing the reality we were going through and our attitude towards it.
We were listening to each other's music. There was a real protest movement going on about Vietnam.
University Soldier On, you know, I mean, she was an activist. She was the first woman of activism that had an audience.
He's 5'2" and he's 6'4". He fights with missiles and with spears.
She was very instrumental in making those images and those points clear to a very open and willing audience.
And he's fighting in Canada, he's fighting in France, he's fighting in the USA.
Unlike my peers in show business who had never been to a reservation, and unlike my peers on the reservation who had no clout or power or voice, I had those too.
This is not the way we...
All right. Jolie, you want to chime in about Buffy St. Marie?
I currently teach a college level course on Rumble, American Indians Who Rock the World. And last week and this week, we are covering protest songs and the impact they've had on Native people and their role in society. So this is really kind of fresh in my memory. And I've been using as some of the kind of folks to talk about the Red Power movement, college students, and in this case, Richard Oakes and Laneta Warjack now, who were college students at UC Berkeley and San Francisco State 50 years ago in 1969, who then took over Alcatraz Island in a petition and a demand that American Indian courses in culture and curriculum be taught in college. And those two students started the Red Power movement. So I know students really like to hear and see themselves empowered by other young people. So I really like to showcase it from that perspective. And one of my favorite artists, and she happens to be a woman, is Buffy St. Marie. So in the film Rumble, it really talks about Buffy and her contribution in this era, but also how the government limited her growth as an artist. And really, it wasn't until recently that people began to see how she was maligned by the songs that she was singing, which would be considered pretty mild in tone then and now, but how the voices of Native people have been suppressed for imaginative fears that the government has had, going back to, Wounded Knee, and dances, going back to the ghost dance and the government's fear of our songs, our dances by women and children. So, you can take the lesson plan all the way back to the early foundations of the United States and some of the conflicts culturally, but also to its present day with protest music being and kind of an uplifting and an outlet. And Taboo's featured in Rumble, and he's singing this song about Standing Rock. So that in side by side with some of John Trudell's work, Buffy St. Marie's work, Redbone's early work, that is also protest music, I think is a wonderful opportunity for students to learn about this country, democracy, and if you don't like things, there's a way in which to change things.
Oops, awesome. Okay, so this lesson includes one document set that looks at the lyrics of Buffy St. Marie, of Peter Lafarge, and then let's go to the next one, to Johnny Cash, and explores his diving into the Red Power movement in this moment. I believe the next clip is next. Let's see here. Yeah, let's watch this guy.
Johnny Cash had been wanting to make a folk record, and he had seen Lafarge perform. And he said, I have to meet this musician. And Johnny Cash felt very connected. And then they hung out and spoke, and he said, I want to take some of your songs and turn them into a record. He was in an extremely high moment in his career, coming off the success of Ring of Fire.
I went down, 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 and the flames went higher, and it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire.
And even at that moment, riding the high of these giant hits, Columbia Records was still trying to block him from making this record. And this album was essentially censored and banned.
By America banning that album, it just closed everyone's conscience of the American Indian and their struggles.
I was no longer a marginalized person writing Universal Soldier or talking about Native American issues in a coffee house. All of a sudden, I was talking about those things in big-time television. And all of a sudden, everything disappeared. All of a sudden, there was no interest. And it was only 20, 25 years later that in Toronto, a radio broadcaster started an interview by apologizing to me for having gone along with letters written on White House stationery, commending them for suppressing my music, which deserved to be suppressed. And that's the way he started the interview. Apparently, I had FBI files and got blacklisted, although I didn't know it at the time. And later on, it was the CIA as well, I understand.
They went after Buffy, and they went after a lot of people at that time just to kind of keep them silenced.
I think I could have been more effective had I not been gagged in the US. But who was it who owned the newspapers? Who owned the television stations? Who owned the radio stations? Were they going to play Buffy St. Marie? No. It was the oil companies. It were people who were digging for uranium, stealing uranium, transferring it into private hands. That's who owned all that. You think that they were going to be making me a star? I don't think so.
So it's pretty easy to play on the emotions of teenagers with the idea of something being banned, for sure. What's cool, I think, here is that we get into the actual documents. So Johnny Cash's album that gets Ballad of Irish Hate, not Ballad of Tears of American Indian, that gets banned. He starts taking it around by himself to radio stations with this actual letter in it, and we include the letter as a handout. Next slide. And we also get a a bit of actual declassified surveillance on people from the Red Power movement to look at what's going on at this moment. Next. And so also, though, there's this positive history happening here where students get to learn about the activism that was happening. So there's a few specific things highlighted here: the Native occupation of Mount Rushmore. Next. The Alcatraz occupation. There's the official proclamation. Next. And there was John Trudell in that picture, who we saw much later in the film. And then the Trail of Broken Treaties. So all of this material is actually built into these lessons so that it's just easy to use right there with the students. And although we're not seeing it, there's questions and guidance to teachers given the whole way with, suggested questions to ask students. It's all put together in a narrative form so that one thing leads to the other. Like, I'm sharing the resources right now, but it's all compiled more in a form where it unfolds during the class period. Next. So in this lesson, the summary activity first is in form of a question, and then there's suggested extension activities for students. Okay, great. Let's get on to another clip, and this is a fun lesson.
We were wearing really nice mohair suits with nice black shoes. And we did our Cajun set, and we wore bib overalls. I had to keep changing, so I had to do something that we could actually hold on to, and it would be ours. Jimmy was one of the people that supported us the most. He's the one that told us in the very beginning, do the Indian thing, man.
To see them on Midnight Special doing Come and Get Your Love in full regalia, doing the drum chants before they would go into one of the hit records, that was pretty heavy.
We used to mic the floor, so when we came out, the stomping sounded like a herd of buffalo coming, it really sounded loud. Here we were, 4 young Native Americans doing these chants, these primitive chants, and then all of a sudden going to this rock and roll, and then put the two together, and people would just say, wow, what's going on, and what's going on, They couldn't believe that here they are, these 4 Indians with garb and moccasins and all the things that they've seen in film, actually playing rock, and our album came out and it just took off and it went crazy.
Come and Get Your Love. It's in Guardians of the Galaxy. When the hero is marching through the alien landscape, knocking off monsters and all this stuff, he's strutting to Redbone. There's a real conqueror's vibe to that song. You can be explicitly political and make an important point, but ultimately getting through is the best revenge. You want to do it with class, you want to do it with dignity, and Redbone did that.
So I love what David Frick says at the end of that clip, getting through is the best revenge. And what better question to ask to kick off an exploration than, well, what did Redbone get through, right? And in this case, they got through quite a lot, and I'm sure everybody here could offer quite a few things. But in this lesson, we use Redbone as a springboard backwards. So 1973, Redbone hits the Billboard charts with Come and Get Your Love. 1893, only 80 years earlier, the traditional music they open up that clip with was illegal, and not just illegal, but the tipping point that starts the first shots fired in the massacre of Wounded Knee. So this lesson frames Redbone, and this is kind of at the heart of how we try to do what we do. Redbone is exciting, Redbone is fun, Redbone is positive, Redbone is a victory, and we use that as a way to explore something that's less positive in the past. But we can still start with a victory so that anyone who sees this can see themselves first on stage winning and then explore a less good time. Next slide, please. So, go ahead, Jolie.
Let me just add, because that's, we use Come and Get Your Love to get my daughter, who's now 8, to learn how to stand and then walk, because she would just always dance in her crib. So that it's just kind of a song that's in our family, and we use it in terms of growth mindset to get through, like, you know, just when you think you're the only one and no one's paying attention to you, because I think she's the only Native in her school, or at least she's the only one that's out and about, loud and proud. So, you know, we use that to remind her of growth mindset, that she can accomplish, she can break through, she can get through, and she can make her way. So I know a lot of teachers are using that now with young people, and that's also a way that one can frame that statement.
Great. So this lesson is built for AP History, but includes scaffolding to break it down different ways. And you see the title, Native American Music from Wounded Knee to the Billboard Charts, a document-based exploration. And really the guiding question is how is music part of culture, and how did the US government use music to try to control music, to control culture, in particular in relation to Wounded Knee, the Dawes Act, and the federal Indian boarding school system. Next slide, please. We got one more clip we can watch here.
Music by Native people presented a threat, was seen as dangerous, and people were arrested. Singers and dancers incarcerated for performing this music, treaty guaranteed rations withheld from them. The federal government begins passing law after law in an effort to control Native people in every way that you can imagine.
They went after every part of our culture. So of course they're going to go after the music, because it's an integral aspect of our culture. Because back in that time, in those times, everybody had a morning song to greet the day. They were songs of ancestor. They were songs of the old way. They went after our culture. It was genocide, and they wanted to erase every cultural perception of reality that we had.
On December 29th, 1890, the U.S. Army surrounded a number of ghost dancers at Wounded Knee and slaughtered over 300, mostly women and children, but also men who were participating in the ghost dance. And this is essentially the beginning of the banning of Native music in the United States.
Great. So that clip is not positive. The Redbone takes us back, and then we can work our way back to Redbone. So in this lesson, there's tons of historical documents based on the issues that I brought up. And historical newspaper articles, historical photos, maps, a real chance to dive into that moment in time and see perspectives. The newspaper articles, for instance, include the days leading up to Wounded Knee, the days after Wounded Knee, and varied perspectives on it. There's written accounts, just chock full of source data to contextualize these things. the summary activity here asks students to think about everything they've learned and then look back to that Redbone clip at just the beginning. Say, you know, okay, it was fun when we first saw it. It's my dog again. How about now? What do you think about it? How is your opinion of it, or how has the opinion of the importance of that clip changed? My son is coming in. It might get loud here. All right. Is that the last lesson in there? Okay. Wow, I surprised myself. I thought there was one more. Ha. So that's the final lesson that we have in the set. I think, is there one more, or did we do them all? I guess we did them all. Quicker than I thought. Jolie, anything you want to add?
Well, I think for Indigenous Peoples Rock, Indigenous People Rock, there's so many different ways in which you can take the lesson. And again, I'd like to see folks end up with a focus on the celebration and contribution of American Indians to music and culture and popular culture as they know today, because that really finds that kind of connective tissue. But you can see from the lesson plan, we go deep, and there are so many different ways in which one can take it. And I would really want to encourage teachers to use Debbie Reese's book. I think that's a wonderful way in which to further elaborate on materials and discussions, and always focus on place-based learning. I think any way you can adapt this to the space and the place that you're at and that your school is at, I think is very empowering for students because it makes it real to them. So that would be, I guess, my parting words is to make sure that we're focusing on place-based learning. This is something we have talked about at our previous sessions, and to focus on the Indigenous people on whose lands that your school is on today.
You have a tool for that at your site, don't you?
Yeah, you can go to our California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center website, and you can download our Land Acknowledgement Toolkit. It's a pretty extensive toolkit, but it does give you a lot of information and background information on how we do it, why we do it, when we do it, and I think that's a really great way in which teachers can include a land acknowledgement and have their students learn and focus on the people whose land that they currently reside and learn on.
Jolie, how can teachers access this? Is it through the California and Indian cultural site that you're talking about, or
the toolkit?
Yes.
Yeah. When you go right to the website, California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center, you'll see the toolkit right on the front page.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Well, that was easy. We made it with time to spare. Bill, thank you so much for all the work that you do at the foundation and with TeachRock. Isn't this amazing, the work that the foundation and TeachRock are doing, and Stevie Van Zandt, his dedication and devotion to learning and music and making sure.
Yes. Jolie.